when I first had the opportunity to conduct E.T. That was the very first one that I did, and I personally believe E.T. to be the greatest film score yet written. That's a bold statement. That was my first full feature-length film live in concert, and I feel like I did just a horrifically awful job.
Hi, folks. Welcome to In Conversation. This is the series where we interview many of the artists, producers, and musicians behind the concerts that we promote and produce. My name is Nicholas Arnold. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager with Attila Glatz Concert Productions, and I have been waiting to do this interview today. My guest is one of Canada's most innovative and imaginative conductors, an artist equally at home conducting symphonic masterworks, opera, contemporary music, and films live in concert. He has been consistently acclaimed for curating thoughtful, incisive, and affecting musical performances. He is deeply committed to supporting Canadian artists and composers and has premiered over 30 new Canadian works during his career and firmly believes the importance of supporting Canadian composers to write significant, substantial works cannot be overstated. Please welcome my guest for today, the one and only Evan Mitchell. Evan, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
I gotta say, first of all, everyone at Attila Glatz has just been raving about you and our film concerts, and so I've been very much looking forward to this conversation. But one of the things I definitely want to dive into is your work with the Kingston Symphony, because that's my hometown. I didn't make that connection with you, but I grew up there. My family's all still there. So you've been doing that since like 2014, I think.
That's right. This is my 9th season with the orchestra.
Easy.
My first season was 2014, 2015, so I've been with the Kingston Symphony as music director since then, including during a couple of very unusual seasons recently during lockdowns and such. Yeah, so this is my 9th season.
That's amazing. Yeah. I love Kingston. I love visiting there now. Growing up, I felt like I needed to get out and see bigger things, but now that I'm a bit older and wiser, I love going back there to the peace and quiet.
Sure.
I love doing this just with musicians and artists, is kind of starting back at the beginning with your career. You were 16 years old when you started with drum lessons, I believe. Which I find that's such an interesting connection to conducting, obviously. But can you just talk to me a little bit about that, at least your musical beginnings in that way, and what got you started into drumming?
Sure. So, everyone who becomes a conductor, I think most people who become musicians, their path is everyone's is a little bit different. I was seen as a bit of a lost cause because 16 is almost universally regarded as too late to start with sort of a serious focus on music. And on drum set, forget about it if you're thinking about it, an orchestral career. But as I was growing up, that's not the entire picture, because my family is very musical. My mom sang a lot. My dad played piano. He had about a grade 10 or so conservatory training for piano. And my mom and my dad would often, on Friday evenings, they would go at the Berkeley Room at Binghamton's in Kitchener. And they would they were basically the cover duo, and they would sing and play for all sorts of people. They did that every Friday night for years. So I was always surrounded by music when I was growing up. It just wasn't necessarily of a serious intent to say, you're going to devote your life to it, or you're going to be doing post-secondary studies to be a musician as a vocation. Yeah. But I sang in choirs growing up. I took string courses in high school, no private lessons, until I got that drum set for my 16th birthday. And that was the beginning there. And I wanted to be a rock star. I was big into the Canadian alt rock bands at the time, the I Mother Earth, Our Lady Peace, Big Tragically Hip fan.
Yeah,
Actually had a couple of Tragically Hip tributes, of course, now that I've been to Kingston. And I've been there as music director for a while. I have met many members of the band. They're lovely guys. And so that was sort of the background. And as time went on, because I had exposure to the orchestra through my string classes, through school trips, these sorts of things, and through film scores as well, I gravitated towards the orchestral sound. And so I went to to study classical percussion instead of drum set
Hmm.
when the time came to pick my university choice. And then I was just doing conducting for my friends. My friends who were composers, they needed conductors for some of their larger pieces to be premiered. So I sort of dipped my toes in there, and I really enjoyed it. Took a bunch of courses, and that essentially was what put me on the path.
Was there like a defining moment, like other than I guess just conducting for your friends, where you felt like, oh, there's something really special about conducting, whether it's like watching someone like John Williams or something like that? Was there sort of an epiphany moment where you thought, oh, I actually want to shift gears here?
Yeah, there actually was, because the thing is, you really, unless you are a truly generational talent, I think it's tough to do both be a performer and be a conductor at the high level simultaneously. I certainly can't do it, but I was studying. When you're young, you have all sorts of time, you have all sorts of energy. So I was studying both paths pretty voraciously. Um, there was a time in my last year of my undergrad. This was before I was applying for other schools for my master's. When I was the section leader of the percussion section for the university orchestra, and one of the players came up to me and said, "You're assigning yourself all of the good timpani parts." So as section leader, I got to assign the parts, and inadvertently, I had in fact been a little bit greedy with the timpani parts. So there were two pieces, Beethoven's Seventh Symphony and the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, that I really should have given up one of those two. So I decided to give up Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, which is much more of a standard timpani part, something that would have been very useful for me in my future timpani endeavors, to have had the experience of having gone through it, in a university orchestra context. But my rationale was, I would still go to the rehearsals and I would just sit at the back with the score and follow along. And that really, looking back on that, I've often thought that that has been sort of a defining moment to it wasn't a point when I sort of had to decide. The point when I had to decide was when I was applying for master's degrees, and I had to choose which I wanted to do. If I wanted to be a percussionist, if I wanted to be a conductor. Again, I auditioned for conducting and percussion, and I got in a bunch of places for both. But you can't do both at the same time with a
Right.
master's degree. With the way that the programs that these schools had laid out for me, so I had to make the choice. And the choice was not that hard, because I think that, again, that particular moment with Beethoven's Seventh had sort of aligned me to say, maybe I have more to say as a conductor than as a percussionist.
It for one of our other concerts, Salute to Vienna. I was interviewing a lot of the conductors that we have
Sure.
from all over, from like Budapest and Hungary, and it seems like such an obvious thing to ask you, because but you're the first one that I've met who did percussion first. A lot of them did piano or clarinet or something like that. And so the obvious question here is like, how has having those roots in percussion actually influenced you as a conductor, and how do they help you today?
Well, okay. So starting with the advantages, an innate, finely tuned sense of rhythm is an incredibly important thing as a conductor. I think that, and it's also shaped my philosophy. I personally feel like sometimes there is a consideration that if everyone is playing together, then it is accurate. It's good. It's correct. But if everyone is playing the wrong rhythm, or if the pulse is slowing where it shouldn't, and we're all together, yes, we're all together, and so it sounds very convincing. So it's convincing, but it isn't necessarily correct. And one of the things I like to think about quite a bit with regards to rhythm specifically is the idea of consonance and dissonance in harmony with chords, with progressions. We hear combinations of notes that sound very pleasant. We hear sounds of combinations of notes that sound less pleasant. We hear combinations of notes that feel as though they're leading to something else. That's the concept of consonance, dissonance, and resolution. In rhythm, there is the same principle. It's a little bit different, but the very idea that a lot of offbeats, for example, in say a jazz chart,
Right.
propel the music forward. That's the idea of rhythmic dissonance, so to speak, leading to a resolution of finally arriving on a big downbeat somewhere. So I think about rhythm a lot. I think about rhythm very carefully. And I obviously know the percussion section very well, which is usually a bit of a lacuna for many conductors in terms of just personal familiarity, because ideally you do have at least working knowledge of all the instruments that are in the orchestra with the people who are playing in front of you. The downside to that is the I think the easiest springboard for big picture to be a conductor is to be a pianist, because you can play a reduction, you can reduce the score in front of you if you're of that if you've honed that ability, and so big picture comes to you very quickly. If you're a violinist, you have great facility and understanding with the violins. So that's the first and the seconds. So you're already talking about you're looking at least let's say 20 people or so that you are intimately familiar with in terms of how their instruments work. Beyond that, the rest of the strings, you can speak about bowings, technique, that sort of stuff very confidently. As a percussionist, I had to work a lot to be able to be conversant with the strings. And, still, even then, string players, knowing that you're not a string player yourself as a conductor, you have to be very careful about what you suggest. So, I had a lot of homework to do, I think, with regards to the strings, the winds, and the brass, just to sort of having a functional understanding of how those instruments work. So it's not as though you're coming from a deficit, because everyone's personal frame of reference frames themselves as a musician, and that's really important in my experience as a conductor. But some are just going to have to. I think if you're a pianist, you don't have to work quite so hard at understanding big picture. If you're a string player, you don't have to work quite so hard at understanding the strings, who are the bulk of the orchestra in terms of just number of personnel. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. I think that it's given me a unique perspective, and I'd like to think that I don't have flus saying to me, "Oh, what an ignoramus," you know.
Yeah, because it's tough, right? Because you're in such a position where a lot of people can take advantage of the ego of being in a position like that. And I'm sure that there's that little bit of like, especially if you come into a new orchestra where you want to prove yourself, but also not micromanage an orchestra and musicians who know what they're doing. Is that work kind of ongoing for you in terms of like deepening your understanding of these instruments that you didn't start with? Is that something that you just continue with, or?
In terms of where I'm at, I'm pretty comfortable with regards to my working knowledge of the instruments. I'm not going to stay up on the read up on the latest extended techniques for the oboe multiphonics or those sorts of things, or read old treatises on how how to play the violin. I think I like to continue to read about period practice, about older music, about music of the Renaissance and Baroque music. I think that's something that I continue to sort of um, widen my perspective upon. But I feel pretty good about where I am. I think that the hardest thing with regards to being in front of an orchestra and dealing with a bunch of people in front of you is just the actual people element. That's not to say that orchestral musicians are difficult, but it's a very strange job being a conductor. It's quite odd, and dealing with the people element is something that only life and experience can teach you. Um, I don't even think they really try in school very much. During my early days, in particular, when I started out my professional experience as an assistant conductor with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, and that's a very interesting position because you technically have authority. You're in front of the orchestra, but you really don't have any authority whatsoever, because what is a 27-year-old who is experiencing a Brahms symphony from the podium for the first time going to tell to the principal clarinet and the solo who's played it 30 times? It's so there's that strange schism there. But I find that dealing with people is often you're on the clock, you're under pressure, you're working quickly. You want to say the right thing that inspires people to play and inspires them in your vision of the piece. But you also want to correct mistakes or adjust things so that they align with your vision. And yeah, the people element is what I find to be pretty tricky.
Yeah, it's like you are the leader, but you're also leading in such a way that puts the spotlight on them, right? Because obviously everyone in the audience shouldn't necessarily be all zeroed in on the conductor. They should be getting the experience as a whole. So it's this balance between being humble and also still holding the reins, I feel like.
Yeah, I see it. I honestly, I see it in that particular with that particular perspective. One of the things that I learned early on that I'm very happy with, that I have a really good sense of, is when to actually assert control with regards to like my beat, from the baton, really saying this is where we are, this is the time that we're keeping, and when to be very obvious that I am letting people just play. Uh, and I think that it's not even just the fact that I'm letting people play, but I'm communicating to them that that's what I want. Um, that that has served me very well because players love that. They love to have leadership when they need it, when it's necessary in the music, to have someone reliable up there who's clear, who's communicative, who's not getting in the way. But the better the orchestra, the less you really have to do in that regard. And when you're just sort of I guess, gently guiding the moments in between those aspects of the music in which those passages when people can just play a solo or play a passage in which you need to show very little, just sculpt the air a little. People really appreciate that, and you get the best results. So that's a style of command that I think is I'm very happy with where I'm at that, and I think that it's done me very well.
And I think, as you said, it's years that help you develop that. It's wisdom of experience and years. Like, it's not something that you can just kind of come out of the gate with
Yeah.
and do.
Time on the podium, absolutely. Time
Yeah.
on the podium in front of people. Life experience, sure. There's something to be said about having lived with this music, and um, I've mentioned it before. I think frame of reference, people's frame of reference, personally, is very important when their music is a form of expression. It's, in my opinion, one of the very best forms of expression, and so I think that bringing yourself into that helps elevate the music from the notation on the page into something that can really reach out and strike someone, make a connection emotionally with someone who happens to be listening.
Love it. Let's talk about your relationship with film scores, because similar to you, like that. If I wasn't listening to bands, I was probably listening to film scores. And I was just watching your interview with To Live about Jurassic Park, and for me, that film, there's something that John Williams and Spielberg do where it's a monster movie, it's terrifying, and yet the music is this feeling of something bigger than ourselves, that motif as you're like approaching the island. um can you just talk about how film scores inspired you when you were listening to them as a kid, and then also what got you into the conducting of them in the first place?
Well, I think that John Williams in particular, and then eventually the classic masters of the past, who were very much the pioneers of the grand sweeping symphonic tradition in film scores, Max Steiner, for example, Eric Korngold, Bernard Herrmann. These were people that I listened to a lot while I was growing up. When I was 13 years old, my parents got a CD player. And for all of you people who are a little bit younger than I am, CD is obsolete media, but it's a physical disc. It represented in the day a huge upgrade from the cassette tapes because you could fast forward or rewind or snap to tracks instantly, and beyond that, the audio quality was just monumentally better than the media that we had in the past. And so, never mind that it's actually a hugely impractical medium, particularly if you're on the go. You can just scratch or crack a CD like that, which is, I guess, why we don't really use them anymore. But
Yeah.
back in the day, CDs were king. And so my parents got a CD player and a very nice speaker system. And for my birthday, I got um, some CDs, and I got some gift certificates and some money to go towards the purchasing of CDs. And one of the very first ones that I purchased was the Jurassic Park soundtrack in 1993. And this was a film that had captivated my imagination, having seen it in the theaters. I think I saw it in theaters 3 times. And by the third time, I was just looking to see other people's reactions as sort of key moments happened, both the reveal of the Brachiosaurus, for example, or there's a scene near the end in which our heroes are sort of going through an air duct in the ceiling, and the raptor just gets up and jumps up and snaps at them. And like that's it's not all that dramatic right now, but in 1993 it was the most incredible thing anyone had ever seen. And you people have people like lift up their legs in the aisle in sort of reflex. But I do think that I recognize that the music was a big part of the success of that film. And of course, I was in love with Star Wars and the Star Wars series, as most people my age were. And a big part of that has to do with John Williams's score. And so I had, having made that connection, uh, I bought all sorts of official soundtracks from pretty much any film that had an orchestral soundtrack or an acoustic soundtrack. And I love the music of John Williams. I again fell in love with the scores of the past, Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, of Steiner, Bernard Herrmann's work with Alfred Hitchcock, Vertigo, of course, and Psycho, and The Adventures of Robin Hood. Actually, Eric Korngold, one of the greatest of all movie scores. And I think that just for me, the sweep of the big screen happened to be best expressed with the sweep of a large ensemble in that tradition. And so it was just great to see that after a period in which it seemed as though that was going out of style in the mid to late 70s, John Williams seemed to be single-handedly reviving that, and that's been the way that he's composed ever since. And I was obviously very much drawn to that. So I would consider John Williams in particular someone who is very much responsible for me falling in love with the orchestra, and as a gateway to more concert repertoire. But I've always loved the film scores, and when I first had the opportunity to conduct E.T., this was a Attila live show, I believe, many moons ago now.
Yeah.
That was the very first one that I did, and I personally believe E.T. to be the greatest film score yet written. That's a bold statement, I know, but it's really incredible. And being it was the first one that I did, full feature-length film, I'd done some clip shows. I had done some work with, excerpts and these sorts of things. That was my first full feature-length film live in concert. And I feel like I did just a horrifically awful job. So I'm hoping that I have been assured that I did not. But I think that at some point I would very much like to come back to ET.
Yeah.
And do. I feel like I could just do more justice to it, because there is a score that really deserves it.
Especially if it's if you hold it with such regard, I could understand that wish. So walk me through. I have an idea of how it works, and I've seen you in action with how it works. But just for those who don't know, tell me how it actually works conducting a film score when the film is being projected on the screen like that.
So it's first off, if you've never been to one of these, it is the most extraordinary way to experience a film. It doesn't even matter if you've seen it 10,000 times. There is nothing like this. It's the best format to hit. It's the best concert format for wide audiences that I have ever encountered. So if you're on the fence, you've got to try one of these concerts. You won't believe just how much fun it is. You simultaneously become more immersed in the music and with the playing of the music than ever before. And then 10 seconds later, you've almost forgotten that there's an ensemble there on stage. And it's really the most wonderful thing. So the way that it's possible is that digital audio engineers have either gotten access to the original mixes of the films, or they have gone through a very complex process to digitally isolate the music from the original audio mix. So the film is then able to be played with all the original dialogue and sound effects, but no music. There have been paper parts prepared and scores prepared for the conductor and for the orchestra to play every single note of the original soundtrack. And then to keep it together, there's a very elegant system that, generally speaking, they use a system that was developed by Alfred Newman in the 1950s. And this was something they used to do by hand. They would basically do some defacing of the actual film to be able to have visible markers to show. They would punch out holes at particular points in which the important downbeats would happen, and so then you would have this flash on the screen where the light from the projector would shine through the film, and you see a very bright white circle. That's called a punch. So that would tell you if you were ahead or behind. But you need to have a little bit of anticipation for that because if you are ahead or behind and it happens, all it's told you is that you're wrong. So then what they would do is they would, from corner to corner, they would take a 2 or 3 yard stick and they would scrape the celluloid off the film. And that would manifest itself in a line going from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, and when vertical line. And when it hit the right side of the screen, that's when the punch happens. So it's like the downbeat's happening in 3, 2, 1, punch. And so the benefit of that is that it allows you to keep in synchronization without having a click track or a metronome in your ear or the orchestra's ear, which can keep things feeling very robotic. John Williams, to my knowledge, never uses a click track. And one of the reasons why the music in his films sounds so organic is because, yes, he's using this system to keep all the players together in synchronization with the picture. However, it's being done in the most organic method possible. I think it's extremely elegant. We do it now digitally, of course. It's much easier just with digital overlays. But essentially, I have a film that's prepared just for me as the conductor that is running frame for frame in synchronization with the video that everyone else is seeing on the big screen. Mine just happens to have digital overlays of time codes, punches, streamers, those sorts of things to be able to let me stay exactly in sync. It lets me know where I should be, and then
Right.
I use my ability as a conductor to, sort of corral the orchestra to stay together. Generally, all the orchestra has is me, just someone on the podium with a baton.
Mhm.
Every so often, there is a film that requires a click track. I don't like using click tracks, but if I need them, they're my very best friend. Jurassic Park upcoming, for example, is a show I do without a click track, and that helps me just feel a bit more free with it. I've done it a couple of times, so I feel very familiar with it, and I'm going to say right now, make the statement that I feel pretty confident that I'm going to feel uncomfortable very, very rarely. In fact, there's the scene with the sick Triceratops when Alan Grant gets out of the car along with all the others, and he puts his ear to its chest and feels it breathe. And there's a really wonderful lyrical section that happens there. There's very little that happens sort of frame to frame there. So once that just starts, my video tells me when to begin. I know how fast it goes, and if I get a couple seconds ahead or a couple behind, it doesn't matter. So I can just enjoy that like a concert experience, and it's a really wonderful thing to enjoy.
That's fascinating because I would have thought it would be more rigid than that, but it makes sense that you have to let a film score breathe because it is so it is a performance just like the actors' performances in the film, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, have there been panic moments where you're throughout your time conducting film concerts where you're like, I'm way behind, I'm way ahead, I need to corral this. The audience obviously doesn't notice this, but have there been moments where you're kind of sweating as the film is just going?
getting away from me.
Yeah.
Well, so the thing about conducting these, there's a beautiful thing about films. They're very consistent. It's the same way every time.
Mm.
So you can prepare knowing that you have, with 100% certainty, knowledge of how it's supposed to unfold. And the better you know the film, the quicker you can isolate those moments where things get a little ahead or a little behind. And that's, again, in my experience, a very important thing because if you take a long time to notice, if you've been getting caught up in it, and then all of a sudden you're 2 seconds behind, and there happens to be a very important moment that happens with a smash cut in the film. There are moments that need to be essentially frame perfect. Otherwise, it's going to be very obvious. And so, if you're 2 seconds ahead for a moment that's 15 seconds in the future, you can get people moving, generally speaking, without it being too much of a tumble. If you're 5 seconds behind, if you're 5 seconds in advance in one of those moments and you're 2 seconds out, it's hopeless. You're
Mhm.
just not going to make it. So Isolating things quickly, the quicker you isolate, the shorter the period of time between you are in the wrong speed and the right speed, which means that it's you have you always want to stay as close as possible. The further away you get, the more dangerous it is. There have been a couple of times in which things have just sort of rocked and rolled. I can't think of a particular instance. I am pretty obsessive about these things. If I'm a couple of frames out for something that I really want to nail. In fact, some of the most important ones for me, moments where the music changes, where there's like a big smash cut in the scene. I don't even look at my monitor. I will look up at the big screen in front of me that's hanging in front of me just to make sure that it's right there. And then I'll either, grin, or I will just make an awful reaction face to the orchestra, which I shouldn't do that, but it's really just for me. I'm quite obsessive about it. There have been a couple of times when, say, someone comes in early and I have to sort of deal with that, and then I look down and I'm a little bit out, and sometimes, particularly if it's very there's limitations to how fast or how slow you can go as well. Going slow is obviously easier, but if you start to get behind in a very technical passage that needs to stay tight to picture, there's only so fast that the orchestra can go. And sometimes if the base tempo of that particular cue is already at the upper limit of what's technically possible, you really can't get behind it all, because as soon as you do, it's impossible to make up that time. So that's happened once or twice. But generally speaking, the fear is just that something sort of catastrophic is going to go wrong from a technical perspective. This or that happens. But I have that very rarely happens. And the great thing about this is the materials are good. I work with the best technical support in the industry for the people who are running my film and the projection. And the orchestras that are in front of me are always really amazing. And so I feel like we're all just really good at our jobs. And it's very unlikely that anything crazy is going to happen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Tell me a little bit, because you just mentioned about kind of getting caught up in it. I can only imagine, I mean, it's your job not to, I guess, and keep the reins. But like, do you find yourself getting emotionally affected by, especially with John Williams motifs? Like you just did the Deathly Hallows Part 2, and especially at the end there when it gets to that classic Hedwig's theme. Talk to me a little bit about, like, are you conducting and also feeling the emotions that the audience feels when these scenes and motifs happen?
Well, being a conductor of films live in concert, as opposed to a concert performance of even, like, say, a Harry Potter symphonic suite, it's different because, in a sense, because your primary focus has to be keeping things together. You communicate with your gesture everything that you want in terms of phrasing, in terms of direction, all of those sorts of cues to the orchestra about how you want them to play that you would do for a regular concert performance. But your focus really has to be on synchronization, because if it's not, then it doesn't make any sense. And you're trusting the players that they're going to, they've done it through the rehearsal process. If you've heard anything that has been like, this is too forceful, or this is too gentle, or whatever, you've presumably fixed that in the rehearsal process. That's not to say you don't feel emotion. I mean, as a conductor, if you're a robot, everyone's going to feel very comfortable about keeping things together, but they're not going to have a particularly great musical experience. And while it is a real tightrope act doing film scores live in concert, it's extraordinarily difficult for the orchestra. It's even harder than the people for the sessions when the music was recorded, because they were able to stop and start, and they would do 10 minutes a day. And here you just gotta plow through everything and keep to picture. But yeah, I feel I always feel connected with the music. You can't be overly emotional, because then you'll lose control beyond where you should be controlling. I will say, when I did E.T., obviously that has one of the most emotional endings of any film, and the music there is one of John Williams's crowning achievements. And what I did not anticipate was, when I really wanted to do that part justice, because of course it's such an important passage sorry, in film music history. people behind me were openly weeping in the audience. It was very distracting. So that was a surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes left here, which I knew we would not have enough time to go into your extensive career. But just quickly, can you tell me how you even prepare for something like this? Like, I imagine you're sitting there watching Jurassic Park like 50 times, listening to the score. How, first of all, you've done Jurassic Park before, but
Yeah.
doing it for the first time, approaching a film, how do you prepare?
Well, I get the scores sent to me, and it's just repetition, repetition, repetition. I approach it musically the way that I would approach a Brahms symphony. I if it provided that it has sort of, I mean, with John Williams, there's a lot of sort of the hallmarks of what we would call a traditional composition, classical, romantic in his case composition, neo-romantic, I would say. Harmonic structure, returning of character motives, those sorts of things. I look at it. I look at it the way that I would look at a symphony or an opera or whatnot. What is the music representing? How is the flow working? I like to think about architecture a lot. There's different aspects of with film, of course. There might be a character theme that pops up. How important is it that I bring that out at this particular moment? I have the film to guide me there. So there's more information than just what's in the score for me to prepare. But then ultimately, once I have done that, then it's a matter of just grinding it and grinding it and grinding it and going over and over and over and just being ready for anything, knowing it backwards and forwards. So again, like, it's time consuming, but the blessing from film is that it's consistent. It's going to be the same every time. And the better that you know it, the better that the better you are at managing those sorts of moments where things could go helter skelter. I have my own reference video is the one that's shown to me in the performance proper. So I'm obviously very familiar with that and all the digital overlays and those sorts of things to help me out. One thing that I also can do with that with those films is that they'll have all sorts of options for multi-channel audio. So if I want to just listen to the dialogue, I can. If I want to just listen to the music, I can. If I want to listen to everything but the built-in click track, I can. If I just want to listen to the click track and dialogue, so I can do all this. So basically, with these films, what I do is I start with just the music, and then I add in the dialogue, and then I take out the music, so it's just dialogue and sound effects. And then the day before the first rehearsal, I do a couple of runs through the film to silence. And for me, if I know what's going on and I can hear it all and have a sense of it with just myself and the punches and the streamers on screen and the music in front of me, but not hearing any of it, I know that I'm ready. So that's the last thing that I do. So it generally starts with, for reference, audio. I start with everything, more or less, and then I kind of start paring it down. The more familiar I get, just to help reinforce the fact that I know how it goes, that I don't even need to be able to hear anything. I don't need to have any audio cues to remind me. That means that I'm ready.
Fascinating. Evan, thank you so much for this. Having seen you in action, I can attest to just how incredible your work is, and I'm so looking forward to Jurassic Park. Can't believe it's been 30 years.
30 years, 1993. Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I won't say how old I was when it came out, but yeah, I still feel old too. Folks, yes, be sure to check out glatzconcerts.com to see any of our film concerts that Evan Mitchell has conducted and will conduct in the future, and we'll talk about E.T. I wanna see E.T. on the big screen with an orchestra for sure. Evan, thanks so much for doing this. I definitely want to do it again because, as you know, I have so many questions I have to ask you. So we'll set up a time to do this again for sure.
No, I'm very happy to talk about all that. And for all those of you who are, again, maybe on the fence about Jurassic Park, it's pretty much a perfect live and concert experience. It's so wonderful, exceptional music, and it just brings a level of depth and connection to a film that you may have seen a dozen times. It doesn't matter. It's really special. Come and see this live in concert. I guarantee you're going to love it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Evan, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, folks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.